1914, over 2 dozen Greeks, mostly males, had perished in WA.
Senator Smith. It being 2 p.m. Questions without notice. Senator Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck. When the Parliament met in June, the Prime Minister arrogantly boasted, and I quote, "There is not one person who is in an ICU in an Australian hospital as a result of falling victim to COVID." How many Australians are in an ICU due to COVID today?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, as of the last advice that I have, Mr President, just looking for this morning's details. President, I'll have to take that question in notice. I just don't have the details specifically in front of me today's epi figures.
Senator Chisholm, supplementary question.
Thanks, Mr President. In June, the Minister for Health told the Parliament that no one catching COVID and dying in Australia in 2021 is one of Australia's great public health achievements. How many Australians have tragically died as a result of COVID-19 in Australia this year?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, as of so far this year, Mr President, we have had, on the numbers that I have, 936 total deaths in Australia for COVID across the entire pandemic.
Senator Wong, on a point of order.
Relevance. The question wasn't that. The question was this year.
You've reminded the Minister of the question. He has been speaking for 19 seconds. I'm reluctant to say. Have you concluded your answer, Senator Colbeck?
Mr President, as at the beginning of this year, there had been 910 deaths, and so that means that so far this year there have been 26 deaths.
Senator Chisholm, a final supplementary question.
Thanks, Mr President. Does Mr Morrison take responsibility for the hospital admissions and tragic deaths that could have been avoided if he had established a national quarantine system and fixed his bungled vaccine rollout?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, can I say, in relation to the quarantine system that operates in this country, that operates by agreement through National Cabinet by the state. So every time the Labor Party criticised the national quarantine system, they are in fact criticising their state colleagues who, under the National Health Agreement, have agreed to conduct and manage hotel quarantine across the country, Mr President. Mr President, we continue, as I've said on a number of occasions, to build the number of points available for Australians to access a vaccine. We continue to do that. We continue to build the number of vaccines available to Australians, Mr President. And as of today, we're well in excess of 13 million vaccines that have been administered to Australians across the country.
Senator Colbeck, time for the answer has expired. Senator McGrath.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Sport, Senator Colbeck. Can the Minister advise the Senate on the performance of Australia's Olympic team at the recently completed Tokyo Olympics?
Minister for Sport, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator McGrath for his questions. Mr President, on behalf of all Australians, can I extend my congratulations to our 486-strong Olympic team for their outstanding success and achievements over the last 16 days in Tokyo. Mr. President, they have allowed us to cheer on from the sidelines, had us on the edge of our seats, united us as a nation at a time when we have never needed it more, Mr. President. Australian athletes are responsible for an all-time equal record haul of 17 gold medals, along with 7 silver and 22 bronze. Mr. President, can I pay tribute to all of our athletes and also recognise the absolutely enormous efforts of their coaches, support staff, families and friends who assisted them to get to Tokyo. Mr. President, can I also pay tribute to the people of Tokyo and Japan, to the Japanese government and to TOCOG for organising the Games. I pay tribute to the people of Tokyo and Japan for keeping their commitment to the athletes of the world to host what has been, without question, one of the most extraordinary games ever held. Of course, Mr. President, the Games is now something that Australians can, hosting the Games is something now that Australians can look forward to, with the successful bid in the last couple of weeks of the Games for South East Queensland in 2032. Mr. President, and now we all keenly await the Tokyo Paralympic Games, which begin on the 24th of August, and I know our Paralympics team is equally well prepared for those
Senator
Games.
Colbeck. Senator McGrath, a supplementary question.
Thank you. What is the significance of Queensland and Australia securing the 2032 Olympics and Paralympics?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm truly proud to say that Australia will host the Olympics for the 3rd time and the Paralympics for the 2nd time after Brisbane and South East Queensland secured the 2032 Games on the 21st of July, following that historic vote by IOC members in Tokyo. Mr. President, the 2032 bid delegation, representing all levels of government, Premier of Queensland, the Lord Mayor of Brisbane and myself, provided the final presentation to the IOC membership, along with the Prime Minister, who participated virtually. It is a fantastic vote of confidence by the IOC and World Sport in South East Queensland and Australia. Mr. President, we have a track record of hosting highly successful major international sporting events, Mr. President, and that record was critical in the vote for 2032. We know the impact for Sydney, we know the impact for Melbourne, and we look forward to the opportunities
Order.
for Brisbane
Senator
and
Colbeck.
Queensland.
Senator McGrath, a final supplementary question.
What benefits will hosting the 2032 Games provide to Queensland and to our nation?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm very proud that the Morrison government backed this bid every single step of the way. We did so because we understood the social, the economic benefits for Queensland and the nation are substantial. An assessment by KPMG shows that the 2032 Games will deliver a total benefit of $8.1 billion for Queensland, 17.6 for the rest of Australia. And of course, the considerable focus on sport will help us drive increased levels of participation in sport, improved health outcomes for our population, and of course, significant jobs across not only Queensland, but also the rest of Australia, as we build the infrastructure required to support the hosting of the Games in 2032.
Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck. Mr Dutton has said, and I quote, "Anything to incentivise people to get vaccinated, I'm in favour of." Is Mr Dutton right?
Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Of course, the government has indicated that it will consider targeted incentives at the appropriate time to encourage Australians to get vaccinated, Mr. President. But at the current point in time, we have, as we can see in all states, strong demand strong demand for Australians to access a vaccine. Mr. President, we have state premiers who are asking for additional vaccine supplies. So, Mr. President, Mr. Dutton is right. At the appropriate time, the government will consider targeted incentives to targeted groups in support of vaccination. What we won't do, Mr. President, what we won't do is a reckless, across-the-board, more bubble than thought proposal that was proposed by Mr. Albanese last week.
Order.
Mr. President, we will take, as we've done all the way through the development and the rollout of the vaccination process, appropriate measures to, at the appropriate time, encourage Australians to take up a vaccine. That's been indicated by the head of our COVID-19 vaccination task force. It's been indicated by a number of my colleagues, Mr. President. So we will continue to take a considered approach to this, not some reckless spend billions of dollars exercise to encourage people who have already been vaccinated to take up a vaccine. Why would we do that? Why would the government spend taxpayers' money where people have already taken up the vaccine? We will continue to operate our rollout on a considered process.
Order, Senator Colbeck. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you. I do have a
question.
supplementary. Thank you, Mr. President. When asked why he would not consider cash incentives, Mr. Morrison has said, and I quote, "It's not a game show, and I'm not going to pay them off." Can the minister confirm Mr. Morrison approached gambling giant Tabcorp in July about the possibility of incentivising the national vaccination rollout with a lottery?
Order. I'm going to remind senators that when people are participating remotely, we need additional extra compliance with the standing order requiring silence so I can hear the answer. Senator Colbeck.
Mr. President, no, I can't confirm that.
Senator
Not in the
Gallagher,
loop.
a final supplementary question.
Vaccination rollout, okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Has the Morrison government now completely ruled out the use of financial incentives to incentivise the vaccine rollout?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr. President, thank you, Mr. President. Thank the Senator for the question. Mr. President, what we've ruled out is a measure, irresponsible measure, such as the one proposed by Mr. Albanese. We've said that we will consider appropriately targeted measures in support of the vaccine rollout at appropriate times during the vaccine rollout, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, we will continue, as I've said, to responsibly engage with the Australian people to firstly provide them with the opportunity to take up a vaccine and to ensure that they all have that opportunity by the end of this calendar year. And we are on target to do that, as we've said on a number of occasions, Mr. President. And we will, at the appropriate time, consider targeted measures in support of the vaccine rollout.
Senator Brockman.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston. Can the minister advise the Senate of the social services measures the Liberal and National government is implementing to support closing the gap?
The Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thanks Senator Brockman for his question on this really important issue for all Australians. The release last week of the first implementation plan was a really important milestone towards closing the gap measures and targets as set out by the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. The plan highlights the real and practical actions that need to be taken across all governments, and including, most importantly, across the social services portfolio area. The social services package is a $98 million package across 4 particular initiatives that will have direct, positive and meaningful impacts on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. One of these measures is $49 million to support states and territories to review and redesign frontline services. The initiative brings together a range of professionals across a wide cross-section of the community, workers such as social workers, mental health workers, medical professionals, drug and alcohol specialists, domestic violence support services, legal services, financial counsellors, child protection workers, disability support providers, teachers, childcare providers and police to make sure that the support they're providing these families is integrated as best it possibly can be. The social services package also includes $38.6 million towards the Outcomes and Evidence Fund to encourage incentive-based and evidence-based service delivery and deliver tangible and improved outcomes to support child and family safety. The new Closing the Gap outcomes and targets and the implementation plan support embedded cultural competency and trauma responsiveness training in the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous support sector. These new measures go to the heart of the new model of working together under the National Agreement on Closing the Gap and ensure we work toward targets of accountability and genuine partnership.
Senator Ruston. Senator Brockman, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Minister, for that answer. How is the government working with Aboriginal community-controlled organisations to address the Closing the Gap targets in out-of-home care and family violence?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, the only way that we are going to close these gaps and make a difference is if we work together. And that's why we are investing $3.2 million over the next 2 years to assess the needs and increase the involvement of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations in the child and family support sector. By ensuring that these organisations play a central role in the service provision, we'll improve cultural competency and make sure that it is embedded in all of our child and family services. Through the Outcomes and Evidence Fund, we will also be providing support proposals that have been identified by Aboriginal community-controlled organisations that address the targets of both out-of-home care and family violence. This will involve a co-design process between these organisations and the government. Not only will they improve support available for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but it demonstrates an absolute commitment to work together to solve this problem.
Senator Brockman, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How is the government working with states and territories to improve the support available for families with complex needs?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, all governments share a responsibility in achieving the Closing the Gap outcomes and improving outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. And that's why we, as a federal government, are investing $29 million to support states and territories to redesign their frontline services to address the targets, these two very important targets of out-of-home care and family violence. So the redesigned service models will improve how practitioners work together to plan support for families, particularly those families that are at higher risk of interaction with state and territory child protection services. The focus here is on early intervention and ensuring the right support is there for families in an integrated way. We also will be investing $7.7 million over the next 3 years to develop cultural competency and trauma responsiveness for both the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous child and family workforce. These measures will ensure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families with complex needs have access to services.
Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, President. My question is to the Leader of the Government representing the Prime Minister. In a few hours, the premier global body on climate science, the IPCC, will warn us that unless there are immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in pollution from coal, oil and gas, that limiting warming to even 2 degrees will be beyond reach, and that we will reach dangerous climate tipping points this decade. Will the Morrison government accept the findings of the IPCC and change Australia's disastrous climate policy settings?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator Waters for her question. It is correct, as I understand it, that overnight or thereabouts Australian time, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change will release its 6th assessment report, which will provide an update on the latest physical science on climate change, including rates, causes and likely future trajectories in relation to climate change. The report, I understand, will be released at 6 p.m. Australian time. Australian scientists, as part of Commonwealth contributions, have made significant contributions to the science underpinning the report. So, Mr President, our government does look forward to receiving that report and to its public release, and to that informing future deliberations, particularly those that will take place at the Glasgow Conference of the Parties later this year. The government, of course, continues, Mr. President, to work on the pursuit of climate action that is effective, targeted, and particularly targeted on developing the technologies that have enabled Australia to be able to meet and exceed our Kyoto targets, our Kyoto 1 target, our Kyoto 2 target, and to put us on track to meet our Paris targets as well. Investing in those technologies enables us, Mr. President, to not see a tax-based approach, but to see a technology-based approach, which has Australia as a world-leading nation when it comes to the adoption of renewable technologies, has Australia as a world-leading nation when it comes indeed to a track record of making commitments, and not just making those commitments, but seeing them through. And seeing them through and delivering upon them is what is particularly important in that regard. That's what we're doing in relation to Paris, and it's what we will do in relation to all future commitments as well, Mr. President.
Senator Waters, a supplementary question.
Thanks, President. Will your government follow the science and at least double Australia's 2030 targets, so they are at levels aligned with the rest of the developed world, or will you keep Australia on track for 4 degrees of warming and all of the devastation that comes with that?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. The Australian Greens do like to talk down, as always, Australia, and they do that in terms of the targets that we commit to as a nation as well. The simple fact is that achieving our 2030 targets will see emissions per capita fall by almost half. See emissions per capita in Australia fall by almost half if we achieve those 2030 targets, as we are on track to do so. Emissions per unit of GDP would fall by almost 2/3 under our commitment scenario. So, Mr. President, our commitments are significant, and they're significant as well because of our history of emissions reduction and of meeting those targets. Our emissions have fallen by 20% since 2005. We beat our Kyoto-era targets by 459 million tonnes. Between 2005 and 2019, Australia reduced emissions faster than many other nations, Mr. President, and will continue to do that through the technology-based approach.
Senator Waters, a final supplementary question.
Thanks, President. How much in donations from the coal, oil and gas sector will the Liberal and National parties expect to be able to receive by the end of the decade if the Morrison government continues to refuse to lift its 2030 targets and to put the safety and prosperity of all Australians in peril?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, Mr. President, there comes the political question from the Greens, who try to present sincerity on these topics, but then, of course, can't but help to make them politicised agendas of the Greens. Political donations are published, and they're there on the public record for all to see, and of course the hypocrisy that comes from the Greens in relation to their historical track record on political donations and happily accepting big donations themselves and so on is equally there on the public record for all to see, Mr. President. So we're not going to simply take that hypocrisy from the Greens. We're not going to take equally their attacks on the jobs of many Australians in their targeting of different industries and different sectors. What we're investing in are the stretch targets in different industry sectors that will enable Australia to transition in ways that protect Australian jobs, that get emissions down, but also protect the jobs of hard-working Australians across this country and generate new jobs for them in the future.
Order. Senator McCarthy. We have Senator McCarthy remotely. Yes, we should. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Does Mr Morrison agree with Mr Fletcher when he asserts that decisions made in relation to the commuter car park program were made on the basis of departmental advice?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Well, thanks, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm sure that the Prime Minister agrees with statements made by Minister Fletcher. I'm not aware of the full context or direct quote that the senator is referring to, but I know that the Prime Minister has full confidence in relation to Minister Fletcher, his work and his statements. And, Mr President, these projects that we committed to are all about providing additional support and assistance to Australians in terms of going about their daily lives. It's about making sure that infrastructure is there that people want. For example, I think it's important to look, Mr President, at what defines some of these projects. To quote, public transport isn't just about the train line or the bus route itself. It's also about the surrounding infrastructure that makes it work for local residents. That's why we are committing to upgrading public parking facilities here at Mango Hill Station and at transport hubs across the country. Now, Mr President, I hear Senator Watt say that it's a marginal seat. Mr President, that quote was from the member for Grayndler. The member for Grayndler was actually making that quote when he was committing to provide funding for a commuter car park, Mr President, for a commuter car park as part of the Labor Party's commuter car parks program. So, Mr President, those opposite spelled out the arguments as to why these are worthwhile projects. Those opposite spelled out, indeed, the fact that under their model, the member for Grayndler and others were happy to wander around the country making commitments for these projects. So yes, Mr President, we committed to deliver projects that are beneficial to people across Australia, and our commitment is to get on with the delivery of those projects as we have been doing for the benefit of people across Australia.
Senator McCarthy, a supplementary question.
Yes, Mr President. Did the Prime Minister or his office see the top 20 marginal seats list referred to by the Auditor-General in his report? Yes or no?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr President, the Prime Minister's addressed those questions. He's addressed those questions, Mr President. I'm not aware of details around such things. I am aware, Mr President, of course, that there are many projects that are currently underway as part of the Urban Congestion Fund.
Senator Birmingham, I have Senator Wong on a point of order.
It was point of order, direct relevance. It was a very specific question. The Auditor-General has referred to a particular list. The Prime Minister has refused to answer that question.
Senator Wong,
I would ask the Minister to return to the question.
I do grant people who ask questions the opportunity to emphasise the point, but I don't think commentary about the context of the question is appropriate to go into. The Minister, in my view, was answering the question. I can't instruct him how to answer it, and I definitely, as I've said before, can't instruct the content of an answer to the precision of words the opposition would prefer or an asker would prefer. There are opportunities to debate the content of answers after question time. That's not a matter for points of order. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. As the government's made clear, all decisions regarding commuter car parks were identified based on the demonstrated needs within the community. That was the focus of our government, to make sure we were meeting needs within the community. And, Mr President, I'm sure that's what all do in relation to commuter car park type projects, looking at needs within the community. I'm sure.
Order, Senator Birmingham. I've Senator Wong on a point of order. Senator Wong.
Point of order, direct relevance. The question goes to whether the Prime Minister or his office saw the list the Auditor-General referred to.
Senator Wong, you've restated the question. I can't instruct a minister how to answer a question. If the minister, I'm happy to take a submission, but I'd like to finish what I was saying before I take another submission. I can't instruct the minister how to answer a question. If the minister, as I believe he was then doing, was explaining an alternative rationale, I believe that is directly relevant. Senator Wong.
Mr President, on your ruling, the question did not go to the program that he's now expounding the benefits of. The question went only to whether or not a list had been seen. In my respectful submission, I would ask you to reconsider your ruling, given that a discussion of the program itself is directly relevant in accordance with the standing orders, when the only question he is asked, as the man representing the Prime Minister, is whether the list was seen.
And the question referred to a list that was referred to by an Auditor-General's report. Quite right, and I believe, and I'm happy to review the Hansard, and if I'm wrong I'll come back, as I always do, or approach people individually. But if the minister is explaining a rationale that is directly relevant to that question— Well, I was trying to listen to the minister, and I intend to hear the next 17 seconds of his answer, because he wasn't making comments or observations about alternative policies or the opposition or anything I previously ruled against. Senator Wong.
Well, Mr President, if I could ask them, when you go away and can reconsider Hansard, how it is possible that a discussion of the rationale about funding is directly relevant to a direct question as to whether or not a list has been seen. The opposition would be most grateful for that.
I'm happy to review that. Senator Birmingham, to continue.
Thanks, Mr President. They're rather touchy about any comparisons that come up on this program, aren't they? Very, very touchy over there at the fact that, that they were pursuing, of course—
Order. Senator Wong.
Mr President, he is completely ignoring standing orders.
Senator,
this is a question about a list.
And the question about the list referred to an Auditor-General's report, which in my view makes an answer about the context of an alternative rationale directly relevant, but I've said I'll review it. Now, well, there were interjections coming across the table. There was breaches of the standing orders going across the table as well. So if there are no interjections, then ministers can be pulled up for talking about the opposition. But it is relatively common in this chamber for people to take disorderly interjections. They won't be taken if they're not made. Senator Birmingham.
So, Mr President, the ANO report to the Senate about the Prime Minister's letter of 10 April very clear. It's probably worth just emphasising that, from our perspective, there's nothing unusual about that 10 April correspondence.
Senator Birmingham, time for the answer has expired. Senator McCarthy. Senator McCarthy,
thanks,
a
Mr.
final
President.
supplementary question.
Thank you. Why did the Morrison government vote against providing to the Senate the top 20 marginal seats list and spreadsheets shared between Mr Tudge's staff, the Prime Minister's office and the department?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, Mr President, because we're not going to stand for the hypocrisy of those opposite, Mr President. We're not going to indulge their political games and antics, Mr President. That's why we voted in that regard in the chamber, Mr President, because the hypocrisy is quite obvious. Take the 2nd of July 2018, when Mr Shorten did a press conference near Gosford Station to announce $15 million for commuter car parks. He was joined by the Labor candidate for Robertson and the Labor member for Dobell. I wonder how those projects were selected, Mr President. Or the 28th of July, when Mr Albanese was at Narangba Station in Queensland with the then member for Longman, Susan Lamb, announcing $5 million. Guess what? That was the day before the Longman by-election. I wonder how that project was chosen by those opposite, Mr President. Or the 27th of October 2018, when Mr Albanese teamed up with Labor Premier Dan Andrews to announce the Tarnay Commuter Car Park in the lead-up to the 2018 Victorian state election,
Senator
Mr
Birmingham.
President.
Order.
No, you don't like it, do you? You don't like the comparison. You don't like—
Order. 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 Senator Hanson, remotely.
Thank you very much, Mr President. My question is to Minister Birmingham, representing the Minister, the Treasurer. Minister, the Morrison government set up robo-debt to pursue welfare recipients who had been overpaid. In May 2020, the scheme was scrapped and the PM apologised for hurt, harm and hardship caused to people caught up in the automated debt assessment scheme. The total wrongly issued debt sum was $1.2 billion. Minister, last week I questioned you about pursuing those companies and businesses who had been overpaid on JobKeeper claims. What investigation has the government undertaken to ensure taxpayers' monies are accounted for?
The Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator Hanson for her question in relation to the JobKeeper program. In relation to the final component of Senator Hanson's question about the processes that the Tax Office undertakes, the Tax Office has a number of data matching and other processes that it deploys to ensure that claims made are valid claims in accordance with the operations and program guidelines of the JobKeeper scheme that they were administering at the time. It's important, Mr President, to detach some of the public commentary that some have sought to peddle in relation to JobKeeper from what actually those rules and guidelines were. There's a perception that has been painted by some in their public commentary that suggests that any business that ultimately still made a positive financial return through the previous financial year was not eligible for JobKeeper. That's not true. There were different eligibility criteria, and the first phase of JobKeeper clearly outlined the eligibility criteria built upon expectations of businesses at that time. And at that time, we were dealing with a nationwide lockdown approach, different businesses being forced to close their doors across the country, and enormous fears that there could be massive levels of unemployment across the country. That's why JobKeeper was established, and it was established with easy-to-access criteria to deal with the concerns of business at that time. Over subsequent iterations, JobKeeper's criteria was tightened, and of course the ATO has ensured that only those eligible against that tighter criteria received it, and now we have a different model in terms of the COVID-19 disaster payments and business support models delivered with the states, which provide for even tighter program guidelines. But, Mr President, I can assure the Senate that the ATO has enforced the rules at the relevant time.
Senator Hanson, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Minister, you said in your response to me last week, quote, the companies in question were not overpaid, they were eligible under the rules of the program as they operated at the time. Minister, are you aware that companies withheld invoices to receive JobKeeper payments? A lot of companies in doing so paid directors bonuses and shareholders profits at the expense of the taxpayer. Will you investigate?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, Mr President, anybody who has any evidence of any form of tax fraud or program or grant fraud should obviously bring that forward. As said in relation to the primary question, the Australian Tax Office used its range of powers and data and information to be able to determine eligibility at the different points of the JobKeeper scheme, which went through different stages as we tightened its eligibility criteria along the way. But in that first phase, it was very much a program designed to be able to intervene rapidly, quickly across the Australian economy and to save jobs. And according to Reserve Bank research, at least 700,000 jobs were saved just in the period April to June last year, that period when the JobKeeper scheme was initially opened up and initially had the widest eligibility criteria at that time to provide certainty and underpinning across the Australian economy, and it did that effectively, and it saved jobs as a result.
Senator Hanson, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Minister. As I said, you were willing to go after destitute people, people on welfare payments, dependent on welfare, to the tune of $1.2 billion. Why won't you go after big business for what could amount to tens of billions of dollars? If not, the people may assume they are your donors or benefactors.
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, I reject the insinuation at the end there and point out the fact that the Australian Tax Office does go after, to use your words, Senator Hanson, businesses on a routine basis, and indeed any other taxpayers on a routine basis, where there is any evidence of fraud, that the Tax Office undertakes routine audit and compliance activity as well, and that all of those sorts of activities have the potential not just to look at tax fraud, but also in instances to look at the administration of the JobKeeper program as well. So I would want to assure Senator Hanson that enormous effort does occur there, that as a result of their compliance activities, the Tax Office recoups many billions of dollars for the Australian taxpayer, and of course, where necessary, takes legal action against those, no matter how big they may be, to ensure their compliance with tax rules, grant rules and other things that the ATO administers.
Senator Chandler.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Women's Economic Security, Senator Hume. Can the Minister advise the Senate how the Liberal and Nationals government's plans are supporting Australian women to start their own businesses, getting more women into work and helping to secure their economic future as part of our economic recovery from COVID-19?
The Minister for Women's Economic Security, Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank Senator Chandler for this very important question. Mr President, supporting Australian women to be entrepreneurs, to start a business and to take part in the workforce is a focus of this Morrison government. We know that getting more women into work gives women economic security in life and closes the gender pay gap. Mr President, that's why the Morrison government recently announced it's providing $3.5 million to Grameen Australia. Using its proven models that have worked so well overseas, Grameen will establish and deliver an innovative program to create entrepreneurial opportunities for unemployed women. The program invites participants to join small peer support groups and offers mentoring and training and access to loans and savings programs to support them as they establish their own small businesses. Mr President, this initiative will create new self-employment opportunities. It will also boost financial literacy and workforce skills for Australian women. Micro-enterprise development allows women to become their own boss, offering flexibility and choice for women who have so much talent and skill to offer in the workforce. And this program specifically will empower women, helping them to build their careers, but it will also provide flow-on benefits to the Australian economy. It's incredibly impressive to see Grameen use innovative measures to help women establish their businesses while also providing wraparound services to ensure that women have the support available to take this very significant step in their working life and in their careers. Mr President, this very exciting new program will initially be delivered in my home state of Victoria, in the suburb of Broadmeadows, before extending to other locations across Australia.
Senator Chandler, a supplementary question.
Mr President, and I thank the Minister for her response. Minister, how many jobs is the program estimated to create, and how is women's employment tracking more broadly?
Senator Hume.
Mr President, the Morrison government's economic plan is clearly delivering, and that is especially so for Australian women. In June, the workforce figures highlighted that more women are in the workforce now than ever before. The women's workforce participation rate is the highest ever recorded in Australia. And the number of women employed has also increased to record levels, and that's now at 6.25 million Australian women. Mr President, what's more, Grameen Australia estimate that this program will create approximately 6,000 new jobs for Australian women just during its first 2 years alone of operation. This is just one element of this government's women's budget statement, a $3.4 billion package that includes a range of measures designed to remove workforce disincentives for women and increase employment in key industries.
Senator Chandler, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, what are the most recent gender pay gap figures and how have they changed over time?
Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. Again, I thank Senator Chandler for this very important question. I'm extremely glad she asked about changes over time, because at present the gender pay gap is at a record low. It's at a record low of 13.4%. Now, Mr President, Australian women know that it is only coalition government policies that drive the gender pay gap lower. When the coalition left government in 2007, the gender pay gap was 15.4%, and it was on its way down. However, when Labor came to government, they oversaw a rise in the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap actually widened as high as 17.4%. That's right, the gender pay gap in Australia went up considerably under a Labor government. And it's taken a coalition government to get this figure back on the right trajectory, heading down once again. And we won't stop here, Mr President, because in the 2021-22 budget we announced a targeted review of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency with the aim of to push the gender pay gap even lower.
Before I call you, Senator Wong, I've just had a message from one of the senators online. Could I ask those senators online to go onto mute when they're not speaking? There's just occasionally it's picked up and it can be heard by other senators online but not in the chamber. It's just causing a bit of background interference. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. On at least 18 occasions, Mr Morrison has refused to answer questions from the media and in the parliament about whether he tried to get Mr Brian Houston invited to an event hosted by President Trump at the White House. Why?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr President, I believe those issues have been extensively canvassed in estimates and elsewhere, and I don't have anything to add.
Senator Wong, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr Morrison cited national security as a basis for not answering questions from the Senate about the seeking of this invitation. At the time he sought the invitation, was the Prime Minister aware of allegations Mr Brian Houston concealed child sex offences committed by his father?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Not to my knowledge.
Senator Wong, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. When did Mr Morrison last communicate with Mr Brian Houston? Did Mr Morrison or any of his ministers have any contact with Mr Houston about his recent exemption, enabling him to travel overseas?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. To my knowledge and understanding, that exemption was assessed against the defined criteria by the Australian Border Force through the Home Affairs processes.
Any contact?
Senator Rennick.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash. Can the Minister advise the Senate how the Liberal and National Government plans are supporting Australians to gain skills through vocational education and training as a part of our economic recovery from COVID-19?
Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Rennick for the question. And Mr President, a strong vocational education and training system is critical for Australia's long-term recovery from COVID-19, but also to support our future growth and our future prosperity. As a former skills minister myself, I'm always happy to hear about Australians taking up the opportunities that are presented by vocational education and training in this country. Without a doubt, and certainly from the people I've spoken to, it's a rewarding pathway and it leads to rewarding careers. Mr President, the Morrison government is committed to delivering a world-class vocational education and training system for all Australians. This is a system which will ensure that as a country we have the appropriate skills that we need both now and into the future. Last year, the Morrison government provided the biggest investment into skills funding, with almost $6 billion put into skills funding in Australia over the year. This included COVID-19 support measures, including the Supporting Apprentices and Trainees Wage Subsidy, which I'm pleased to advise has helped keep around 140,000 apprentices and trainees in jobs across Australia. Mr President, as we know, in an economic downturn, the first people to go are normally the apprentices and the trainees. But putting in place the Supporting Apprentices and Trainees Wage Subsidy has ensured that we've kept around 140,000 of them on the job, on the tools, where we need them to be. As you know, we also partnered with the states and territories and we introduced measures including Job Trainer and the Boosting Apprentices and Trainees Wage Subsidy. This measure is now helping Australians get the skills that they need, but it's also helping Australian employers take on into their businesses a new apprentice or trainee. Again, it's all about giving us the skills we need.
Senator Cash. Senator Rennick, a supplementary question.
How is the government's Boosting Apprenticeship and Trainee Commencement Wage Subsidy working to deliver more apprentices and trainees for businesses across Australia?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, the Morrison government's Boosting Apprentices and Trainees Commencement Wage Subsidy, which was introduced, as we know, last year, has already supported over 180,000 apprentices and trainees across Australia. Mr President, that's 180,000 Australians who are now in apprenticeships and traineeships as a result of the wage subsidy that the Morrison government put in place. In terms of the wage subsidy itself, it's 50% wage subsidy up to $7,000 per quarter, and a business is able to access this subsidy right up until March 2022, so that's March next year. They can take on a new apprentice or trainee, access the wage subsidy, and then they get that for a 12-month period. Again, this is all about putting in place those policies which enable employers who are seeking to bring on a new apprentice or trainee into their business, giving them the ability to do just that.
Senator Rennick, a final supplementary question.
How is the government's investment in the Job Trainer Fund helping Australians reskill and upskill into new opportunities?
Senator Cash.
And again, Mr President, last year the Morrison government, as I've said, partnered with state and territory governments and we established the $1 billion Job Trainer Fund. The Commonwealth Government provided $500 million and this was matched by contributions from state and territory governments. The initial investment will provide over 300,000 additional training places, and Mr President, these are free or low fee, and the key to the success of Job Trainer is that we worked with the states and the territories to ensure that these places are in identified areas of labour market demand. So, for example, health, aged and disability care, IT and trades for job seekers and for young people, including school leavers. And then again, as part of the 2021-22 budget, the Australian government announced it would commit a further $500 million, again to be matched by the states and territories, and we are now expanding the Job Trainer Fund by 63,000 places.
Senator Cash. Senator O'Neill.
Much, Mr President, and my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck. How many residential aged care workers have tested positive to COVID-19 this year? How many aged care residents have been hospitalised with COVID-19 this year? And how many have tragically died?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck. Senator, you're on mute, Senator Colbeck, are you? You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr President. There are a number of elements to that question, Mr President, and I don't have the number of aged care workers who were positive at the end of December last year. So to give you a number going backwards, I'm not able to do at the moment, Mr President.
Order, Senator.
Senator Colbeck. The question was how many residential aged care workers have tested positive to COVID-19 this year.
Okay. I allow, because we are remotely, I'll allow you to restate that. He has been speaking very briefly, so I'm listening very carefully. It was a very factual question, so I'll call the Minister to continue.
Yes, Mr President. I have the total number of infections of aged care workers through the pandemic, but I don't have the number at the end of December last year, so I can't give you a number at the end of December. So I can't give you the difference, Mr President. But across the pandemic, there have been 2,278 staff who've been infected with COVID-19. As of today, in New South Wales, there are 33 workers who have contracted the virus, Mr President, and tragically there have been 2 deaths in aged care. One, the recipient, a home care recipient, who, from the advice that I have, contracted the virus from a family member.
Order, Senator Colbeck. Senator O'Neill on a point of order.
Point of order, Mr President. I am pleased that Minister Colbeck has been able to deliver some numbers, but he is not answering the questions that have been asked, which were very specific. The claim is on a point of relevance. They're interesting facts, but they are not facts that answer the question that was asked.
I am not. While the Minister is actually talking specifically about numbers, and he outlined at the beginning of it why he can't answer it in the terms you requested, I'm reluctant to rule out a Minister who is specifically talking about infections and unfortunate deaths of staff and residents. I've allowed you to restate the question. There's an opportunity to debate the merits of the question afterwards, but I believe the Minister is very narrowly confining himself to the information he has at hand, and he is therefore directly relevant. Senator O'Neill.
President, just indicate that the questions are specific because there is information that we seek, and while I'm interested in what the Minister has to say, because it is a matter of such import, if the Minister can't answer this question, he really should take it on notice and provide us with the correct facts.
Senator O'Neill, I allow some flexibility in people, particularly remotely, being able to restate the question. I say again, There is an opportunity to debate the merits of the answer and whether something should be taken on notice or otherwise after question time. The minister is very narrowly confining himself to the facts he has at hand, and in fact he went at the start to explain why he couldn't answer it in the terms requested. These facts, I believe, are directly relevant to the question. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so there's been one recipient of home care who has tragically passed away, and all our condolences go to the family of that person, Mr. President. And there has been one recipient or one person who lives in residential aged care who has passed away. And again, our condolences to that person's family. That person was an unvaccinated resident of a residential aged care facility in Sydney who died in recent days. Mr. President, and I will take the details of the other information on notice and report that back to the chamber.
Senator O'Neill, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Morrison committed that all aged care workers would be fully vaccinated by Easter. Why have only 36% of aged care workers been fully vaccinated?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we've been through this a number of times in the chamber now. When the Prime Minister made that commitment, the intention of the government was to vaccinate the workforce and the residents at the same time, Mr. President. We did, however, take the health advice, which came from evidence out of other jurisdictions, other countries around the world, that it was not safe to do that, Mr. President. So, based on that advice, we were forced to change the way that we were vaccinating the workforce. Mr. President, we continue to provide opportunities for the workforce to get vaccination. We continue to focus our attention on doing that, Mr. President. And as Senator O'Neill quite rightly says, 36.6% of the aged care residential workforce have received full vaccination. 56.8%
time for the
had
answer
our first
expired. Senator O'Neill, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Minister, will Mr. Morrison take responsibility for failing to establish national quarantine and bungling the vaccine rollout, which has left vulnerable older Australians in residential aged care at risk of COVID-19?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr. President, I reject the assertions made by Senator O'Neill. Her blatant politicisation of the vaccine rollout and the Labor Party's blatant politicisation of the vaccine rollout has done nothing, done absolutely nothing for the confidence in the national program. And you could say that the Labor Party have been deliberately attempting to undermine this process all the way through, Mr. President. Of course, the government takes responsibility for making available vaccines to Australians across the country, and we have reinforced and reaffirmed that responsibility on a number of occasions. And we continue to adapt the rollout to meet the immediate concerns and to provide more opportunities for Australians to access a vaccine as soon as possible. We've said we'd like every Australian who wants a vaccine to have one by the end of the year, and we're well and truly on target to meet that
time for the answer expired. Senator Davey.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management and National Recovery and Resilience, Senator Mackenzie. Can the Minister please advise the Senate of the programs that our government has delivered to assist communities and individuals to recover from the previous crisis we had, which was the 2019-20 Black Summer bushfires, including the support in my home state of New South Wales?
Minister for Emergency Management and National Recovery and Resilience, Senator Mackenzie.
Well, thank you, Senator Davey, for your question and for your long-standing support for regional New South Wales. The Black Summer bushfires were one of the most devastating natural disasters we've seen in our nation's history, and in such a time of desperation and loss, Australians came together to do whatever they could to assist these affected communities. Our government is committed to standing side by side with communities as they recover from these devastating bushfires, and through the National Bushfire Recovery Fund and other bushfire recovery assistance, we've provided support to address immediate recovery needs. To date, $2.8 billion of Commonwealth support has been made available for recovery, and 85% of that's been delivered. This includes $1.7 billion delivered from the National Bushfire Recovery Fund, supporting locally led efforts on the ground, because we know that locals know what's best for their community. Significant immediate assistance has been provided, including nearly 5,000 bushfire-damaged and destroyed properties being cleared, over 200,000 disaster recovery payments made to individuals, over 88,000 payments of $400 to assist with back-to-school expenses for families, over 27,000 grants and loans provided to small businesses and primary producers, and financial assistance provided to 3,200 volunteer firefighters. Of the numerous programs included under the National Bushfire Recovery Fund, one of the largest is the $700 million Local Economic Recovery Program, being delivered in partnership with state governments. Nearly 400 successful projects have been announced to date, with more to come. In your home state of New South Wales, up to $2.4 million will construct a new multi-purpose community facility in the Upper Lachlan Shire New Visitors Information and Community Centre. The facility will deliver additional services to the local community.
Senator Davey, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister also explain what support is currently available for those communities who are still recovering from these devastating bushfires?
Senator McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, as part of the Liberal and Nationals government commitment, the $280 million Black Summer Bushfire Recovery Grants program builds on measures implemented by the government over the past 18 months to support disaster response, relief and recovery in bushfire-affected areas. Projects can be funded between $20,000 and $10 million for community organisations, local councils and businesses. This program will help bushfire-impacted communities build back better and funds a lot of those recovery and resilience projects. Amounts identified for each eligible local government area in the grant guidelines are a guide. They are not fixed or capped. I want to make that very, very clear. It is the size of the local government area is not a limiting factor under this program. A committee chaired by the Coordinator General of the NRRA will undertake a detailed assessment of the applications based on eligibility and merit. It will then be to me to then be the final decision maker.
Senator Davey, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. How is our government working to build our resilience,
Senator
not only
McKenzie.
for bushfires, but for emergencies and national disasters more broadly and into the future?
My apologies. Senator McKenzie.
Well, she loves the arts, does Senator Davey. That was a great dramatic pause. But Australians are too familiar with the devastation caused by natural disasters such as bushfires, floods and droughts. These types of events are inevitable. Many hazards are becoming more frequent and intense. We are progressing towards a much more resilient and prepared country, and the Liberal and Nationals in government are driving a comprehensive program of measures in partnerships with states and territories to realise the outcomes of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework and increase that resilience of Australian communities. The framework outlines a coordinated approach to reducing disaster risk, and its implementation will be supported by the first National Action Plan. Australian and state governments have committed $261 million over the next 5 years to work out the priorities of the framework, and in addition, the Australian Climate Service, comprising of the Bureau of Meteorology, the CSIRO, the ABS and Geoscience.
Time for the
Australia
answer has expired. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I ask that further questions be placed on notice.
Senator Colbeck.